Welcome back. You're watching The Money Show with me, Kavita Thapliyal, and let's move on to a very important discussion as far as financial planning is concerned. So, securing your child's financial future is a crucial goal for parents, but this task can be slightly tricky if you are a parent of a specially abled child or a child with special needs. What all do you have to plan in terms of financial planning? Also, what are you looking at in terms of insurance? It becomes really vital. So let's get on board Shilpa Bhaskar Gole, founder, NerdyBird Financial Wellness, and let's talk on this very emotional and a very crucial topic. So Shilpa, thank you so much. Good evening and welcome to the Money Show. A very crucial topic, a lot of parents of a specially able child might not even be comfortable talking about it, okay? Be it to their partners or their relatives or even to a financial planner. This is something which actually needs to be planned really well when you talk about financial future of those kids. But more than that, a lot of it needs to go in terms of counseling and getting the mindset right, okay? So I'm not sure if you've really come across clients like these, but then I'm sure you've been asked a lot of questions on these lines. What, according to you, comes up as a fear that these parents usually have for their kids who are specially abled?
Hi, Kavita, and thank you for having me on your show to discuss this very important topic. Like you rightly pointed out, there are a lot of fears that families with special needs go through on a day to day basis. And I think the most important fear is about having their child to be able to manage their lives independently and without their support. And unfortunately, there are many families in India, and data goes to show the percentages of families where there are special needs, and you will notice that a lot of them, even into their adulthood and old age, the children need that special care, because not only is it physical disability, but in many cases mental disabilities, and also lead to them not being able to have the capacity to carry out their life decisions and life functions independently, Kavita.
Exactly. So when we talk about financial planning, what all are the aspects that one needs to really take care of? Are we also talking about the difference that might be seen depending on the kind of special needs the child might have? Does the financial planning really depends a lot on that? How can one just begin?
Good question, Kavita. So, yes, it does depend on the needs. And what I've noticed is that from family to family, the nuances are very, very unique to that family. So, for example, if you just take two families where they have a child with cerebral palsy, for example, there is one case where the condition is such that the child has a mental, disability as well as physical disability. Whereas there are other cases of cerebral palsy where the child only has a physical disability and is able to carry out every other function as any other child and goes to a regular school. So even within this, you see a lot of nuances, if you look at this example. So going into their financial planning, it's first very important to understand that like any other family, they do incur all the regular expenses that we do as well. And apart from that, there are certain additional costs which are very direct and straightforward if you look at it. So, for example, they spend a lot of money on assistive devices to help their child carry out their day-to-day functions. For example, you have special shoes for a child with cerebral palsy, and there are wheelchairs that come for them as well. And certain kids with, say, who are on the autism disorder spectrum, you will notice that they need communication devices, especially if they are nonverbal. And all of these assistive devices, Kavita, also come with a certain cost, because especially in cerebral palsy, for example, all of these devices and tools have to be changed every few years as the child grows older. And none of them, all of them cost in, nothing less than like a 5,000 or an 8,000 or 10,000 rupees to the minimum. So this is one big cost, Kavita, that they incur. Apart from that, another cost is around therapy. So I'm sure you're aware that occupational therapy is something that the children have access to when they have special needs, especially in the case of, again, your autism, cerebral palsy, as well as your Down syndrome. So OT is something that is another cost which can go anywhere between 800 rupees per session to 2,000 or 3,000 rupees per session. So we're looking at a weekly cost of around 10,000 rupees alone. So that goes up to almost 30 to 40,000 rupees per month for just your therapy alone, be it physical therapy, your speech therapy, and all of it under the umbrella of OT. Apart from that, Kavita, there are also certain hidden costs that we don't talk about so often, like making spaces accessible for them. So even within their house, having in place a ramp for the child to be able to walk from one a slightly lower location to a higher location, choosing spaces and residential areas where they are comfortable living, like a ground floor house or a place which has a good lift for them to access. And even in terms of the places that they have access to in place of shopping places or places to eat, they are very, very confined in terms of the choices they have as a family with special needs to places where the child has access to the location and can get there comfortably. So that is also a hidden cost that is less talked about, Kavita. And another very important hidden cost here is around public transport. So a lot of these children cannot travel by public transport, say a public bus or an auto rickshaw for that matter. So, arranging a car and or having a cab to take you to and fro also leads to an increase in cost. And there are certain big lump sum expenses they incur as well, such as corrective surgeries as they go along. For example, in the case of cerebral palsy, there are always these surgeries around that the child has to get done every few years in terms of hip surgery or a spine surgery. And these are not small costs if you look at it. So I think the first step is to try and assess what are all the costs that you incur and try and preempt what are these expenses that you foresee going forward as well, Kavita.
So, Shilpa, how much of this can be covered by having the right kind of insurance? Or do you think that we don't have enough insurance cover for whatever expenses you just highlighted?
So, good question. And in 2020, IRDA had come out with a ruling, Kavita, that any of these congenital disorders, around autism, cerebral palsy, should be covered under insurance. Unfortunately, the covers are not very adequate. They're very small in amount. So, for example, if you look at autism, Star Care has an offer in place, as well as if you look at Religare, they have an offer as well for health insurance, ranging anywhere between 3 lakhs to 5 lakhs in terms of cover. And they do have certain sublimits as well if you go into the details of the policy. So that is one. And the government also offers something called the Niramaya health cover for children with disability that has a 1 lakh cover per year. So if you can pay an annual premium of 500 rupees if you're above BPL, you can also avail that policy. But is it enough to cover their needs? I don't think so. So often these parents have to look at creating a health fund, especially for the child, to be able to cover all of these corrective surgeries and medical expenditures, Kavita.
Shilpa, this is also the kind of care which parents have to ensure or maybe plan even after they are gone, okay? So here there are two aspects which I want you to explain our viewers. First, the parents, their own investments and having the right kind of nominee, okay? Because then their investment, their money would go to the nominee, which in case could be their child or anyone else who would also be around with their kid as a guardian. Secondly, how do you also nominate the right kind of guardian?
Right. Good question, Kavita. So, in terms of guardianship, it's important for us to note that a guardian is someone who's going to take care of the personal affairs of the child and also the financial affairs of the child in case that is required and there is no trust put in place. In case there is a trust, then this job of managing the financial affairs can be with a professional trustee or a family member who can be made a trustee or a friend who's a trustee. But otherwise, the guardian has a lot of jobs in terms of taking care of the child, ensuring their needs are taken care of, as well as protecting the child in the absence of the parents. So in terms of guardianship, number one, it's very important to make sure that this is someone you can trust, and this is someone who doesn't hold a conflict of interest when it comes to looking after the child and keeping the child's interests above everything else. So when looking for a guardian, I think these points are very, very important that the parents look at. From a guardianship perspective, Kavita, it's also important to remember that after the age of 18, any child, be it a special child or any other child, if you want to continue legal guardianship for your child, even as a parent, then you have to apply for legal guardianship. And this can be done by applying through the nationaltrust.gov.in, where you can go to their website, fill up the online application form, and then that will go to your local committee. and at the district level, it will be the application will come through. So that is in itself a process. So not just about identifying a guardian in case you are not around, but even your own guardianship is something that you need to think about after the child turns 18, especially if the child may not have the mental faculties to manage on their own after the age of 18, Kavita.
Right. But now talking about the future planning of specially abled child after them, what do you think in terms of legalities one should be keeping in mind? Also, we should not miss the aspect of having the right kind of will, which I think a lot of time people miss, even in a normal scenario. How can one go about it?
Absolutely, Kavita. I think the first step from a financial planning perspective is making sure that you have a will in place in which you very clearly list out all of your assets and what are those assets that you would want your child with special needs to have access to through a guardian or through a trustee going forward. The second important thing to mention in the will is about who this guardian will be. So making sure that you have a guardian in place and who the other one or two substitute guardians could be in case this guardian is not around as well. So making sure that the guardianship is laid out very clearly in the will is also important. And along with that, writing a letter of intent explaining to the guardian what are the needs of your child. So that is also something that is less thought of and should be taken care of in terms of future planning for your child in case of your absence. Another very important point, Kavita, is around having a trust. Now, this is again something that parents don't want to go down that route because they do foresee certain complications and having to go through all the legal hassles. However, I believe that having a trust is a very good way to set aside this money for your special needs child and ensure that there is ongoing financial care for the child in a very systematic manner, and making sure that these assets are ring fenced from any other, be it creditors or other people who would want access to your money in your absence. So having a trust in place with a very clear trust deed that lists out what are the objectives of the trust, what are the functions of the trustees, how this money has to be managed, how the distribution of the funds has to happen over time. These are certain things that have to be very clearly laid out so that in your absence, there's no fuzziness around it and there's no conflict around it for anyone. And making sure that if you can, clearly demarcate the roles of a guardian and a trustee, that would be very, very good for you because that reduces the conflict of interest of these two roles as well, Kavita. So this is something that I believe is very important to think about. And another piece that we've missed earlier is around term life insurance, Kavita. Often the funds that you have with you may not be enough to take care of your child in your absence, especially if the child has to go into adulthood and old age without being able to earn his or her own income. So in such a case, it's very, very important that you take a term life insurance cover and ensure that the proceeds of the insurance cover in your absence goes into the trust and can also be used to take care of your child's needs.
All right, one last question to you, Shilpa, and then we'll wrap up this discussion. I want you to give us some model strategies. I know it cannot be like, it's obviously case specific and not one size fits all. But then in terms of investment strategies, what can be thought about and what can be initiated?
Right. So, first of all, it's very important that the family sits down and chalks out the timeline for themselves. Because if the child cannot function without them, even in their adulthood and their old age, then it's very important that whatever funds you're setting aside is not only for the childhood phase of the child, but also for their adulthood and their old age. So, the first thing is to make this timeline and figure out what are the expenses that you envisage. So start with whatever you can possibly list out. There are certain expenses that you're already incurring month on month. Start by listing those out. Think about what are some of them that you could incur in the child's adulthood and what would also continue into old age for the child. Now, this is something which is very difficult to imagine, but go ahead and do this exercise to at least start to set aside funds for these different phases of the child's life. The second is, I think, by simple financial planning rules, make sure that you categorize all of these goals and these expenses that you foresee into short-term goals, medium-term goals, and long-term goals. And within short-term, you may have certain goals which are recurring, for which your regular income needs to take care of those goals. And there'll be certain short-term goals for which you need to be saving up in low-risk, low-return instruments. From a long-term perspective, Kavita, very important for us to think about inflation-beating instruments like high-quality stocks or high-quality equity mutual funds as a route to save up. Especially if you look at medical expenses, we're looking at nothing less than a 14% medical inflation. I'm sure you've heard of that in the recent coverage on medical inflation. So it's very, very important that all of your money for your medium and long-term investments are thought of from an inflation-beating standpoint, Kavita. And I think there we know that what could be better than putting your money in equity, but with the long-term horizon in mind. So even for a family with special needs, I would say that from an inflation-beating perspective, do look at equity apart from some of the debt instruments that you are looking at and diversifying into other instruments like gold and real estate.
All right, I think that will be all. Thank you so much, Shilpa, for being on the show today and helping our viewers plan their finances for a specially abled child. Thank you so much. Let's slip into a quick break, but then post that, let's understand what is the retirement index survey saying about investments done by senior citizens. What are their preferred investment instruments? And also, we'll be answering your portfolio-related queries with Anil Rego after this break.